Okay, hello. Do you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Yeah, my name's Maddie Rippo. I'm General Counsel at Wira, which is the Open Innovation Hub of Telefonica. I work with lots of startups and early stage tech businesses and things. And I also do a similar sort of thing for a video games company called CoatSync, and I work with a law firm called Minkoffs as well. You'll gather from that I'm a lawyer. My pronouns are she, her.
Okay, so in terms of gender, how would you say that you identify?
Well, I identify as a woman. I'm technically a trans woman, but I tend not to present myself as a trans woman per se. I just go by woman.
Okay, and could you tell us a little bit about your transition, about how you got to where you are?
So I originally tried to transition in my early 20s. This was in the early 90s, around about 1993, 94 actually. When I was at law school, and it became pretty evident that you couldn't have a career in law and also transition, or I couldn't transition. At that time, if you didn't pass, then life was very difficult for trans people generally. And I was applying for holiday jobs and things whilst at law school, and I didn't get anywhere with any of them. And I thought, well, there's no way I'm going to get qualified. And at the same time, my mum was saying to me, oh, I don't know whether you're going to have the quality of life that you want to have if you go through with this. And there was a famous TV series about a trans woman who transitioned in the late 80s and had a career, but then kind of had to abandon that because everything was very difficult for her. And all these pressures were going against me. And in the end, I just thought, oh, no, I had to choose, and I chose career. And then I lived in a bit of a grey area for about 8 years, during which I got married, where I would sort of express my preferred gender identity at weekends and things, and then just be my previous self during the week for work purposes. And then when my eldest was born in 2001, I just thought, right, well, I've got to put all of that behind me and focus on being his dad and husband and all that sort of stuff. And I suppressed it for about 16, 17 years. But the physical symptoms of the suppression just gradually became unbearable, just endless migraines and clawing at the sides of my fingernails and anxiety and that sort of stuff. And between 2016 and 2018, lots of things happened. I was approaching 50, my mum died, I sold my business after my business partner left the business. And all of those things mounted up, and my migraines were getting worse and worse and worse, and I just couldn't really cope with it anymore. So I then decided to, late as it was, to have a second go at doing transition. I said, well, there's no way that this is ever going to work, because I've had a previous go at this and the world was just like, that will not be happening. And my ex-wife said to me, I think you'll find the world has changed, and I think you should go and talk to a therapist about it. So I did, and the therapist said, I think you'll find that the world has changed. So I was like, okay. Yeah, and that's how it started. So that kind of started bubbling to the surface for me during the course of about early 2018, and this all then happened in 2019. And so now I've been regarded myself as transition sort of about 2 years or so, and I regret not being able to keep my family together, but I do not regret anything about the transition. It feels like there's a massive load been lifted from my shoulders, and just everything about life just feels that a little bit easier, just apart from
Just being yourself.
That family stuff. Yeah.
So what does it mean to you to be a visible trans person in the world?
For me, the most important thing is to be able to show that coming to terms with your own identity is the most important thing, and that there may be people who find that uncomfortable and difficult to deal with, but the pressure that lifts from you it's so enormous that you'll then find yourself able to do things that you never dreamed that you'd be able to do. And I think that's really, really important. I don't see myself as an inspiration by any means, but I mean, I think if my story shows anything, it's that the importance of eventually finding that authenticity, which I think is just so important. When I was young, it was all about passing. These days, it's not really about passing anymore. You know, when I was young, I used to pass if I was sitting down, then I'd stand up and I'd be the tallest person, be taller than all the men in the room and all the women. So, whereas now I'm like, here I am, you know, and I just walk tall and stride down the middle of the street and just say, this is how I am. And I think being visible just makes life easier for you. It makes life easier for you internally because you're no longer fighting against yourself, but also if you are bold about how you dress and how you look and how you behave, I think the people, 99% of people that you meet just find it so much easier to relate to you. And as a result, these days, I never get misgendered in person, never. It's been about a year since the last time it happened, and that in itself, you see, every time somebody genders you correctly without being asked or told, reinforces. It's like a virtuous circle, you know. You feel more stronger, you feel more confident, and then that helps the next time and the next interaction that you have with somebody that you haven't met before. And being visible, I think, is really important, both for everybody else, to show that actually this is who I am, but also for you in terms of, you know, establishing your own sort of inner belief and self-confidence, I would say.
Okay, so what does Trans Day of Visibility mean to you?
Well, I love the whole concept behind Trans Day of Visibility, because I think firstly it's like a little reward for ourselves, those of us who have chosen to be out and visible and all the rest of it. I mean, like I say, I don't identify myself in public as a trans woman. I just identify myself as a woman. However, I have absolutely no problem at all with the idea of explaining to people what transgender is and the story that I've been through. You only have to look at my LinkedIn posts to see I regularly post about it. So I'm not trying to hide it away or anything, but I don't think that I should be required to walk around with a big badge on my lapel saying trans person, you know. On the other hand, what I do like is to be able to say, like, this is my story, this is where I've come from, this is what I've been through, and you know what, everything's worked out just fine. You know, I've had my ups and downs along the way. It's not been a perfect fairy tale, but then very few people have the perfect fairy tale. That's why it's a fairy tale. So what I like about Trans Day of Visibility is it gives us, it's a little reward for us who've been through the journey to show, yes, look, I did it. You know, I'm living an authentic life. But also it's a bit of inspiration to people who are questioning, because they might be wondering whether or not they can actually do it, whether they have the strength to do it. And let me tell you, I didn't think that I did for a long time. That's why I suppressed my dysphoria for such a long time. And also I think it helps just the general public, you know, it helps show that they don't have to see us as a threat. You know, we're just regular people. And I think that might in the end actually be the most important thing, because the more people understand, the more they accept, which is why I'm always just super happy to talk about my experience, because then they can see that I'm not some kind of freak who's out to steal their children or something. I'm just a regular person who just happens to be
like you. Okay, so slightly mean question next.
Okay.
If you could only give one piece of advice to an aspiring ally, what would that one piece of advice be?
Well, it's really difficult, but I would say what we could use as a community is people speaking out on, not on our behalf, because we don't need people to speak out, you know, to say things for us, but to speak out as a member of, if you know, if you're an aspiring ally, therefore you must be cis rather than trans, I'm guessing, looking at it logically, and therefore as a member of the cis community, which is like 99% of the population, to be able to call out the nonsense, particularly about the fear mongering that goes on, particularly around issues like safe space, which really, really annoys me. I mean, it's just so ridiculous. And the more cis people that are prepared to say, well, hang on a second, I mean, seriously, or trans people in sport, I mean, really, if you could be brave and just challenge, and I don't mean shout people down, I mean, ask the sensible questions. Like, well, what actually does this mean if we were to follow your proposal of having safe spaces, or to create a different bathroom for trans women, or to say that trans women can't compete in sports, and you know, and all the rest of it? Well, then what does a trans woman actually compete in sports wise? Do we have to have, I mean, I play a lot of cricket, do we have to have a cricket league which is just for trans women? I mean, that would be ridiculous. There's barely enough women that play cricket to have you know, a women's cricket league. So, well, there's actually lots of women that play cricket, and I play cricket for 2 women's teams, but there's probably not 11 trans women in the whole of the northeast of England where I live that play cricket. It's just that sort of thing. It's just so ridiculous. So just question, query. When people spout statistics, query what their sources are. Don't be just prepared to accept the nonsense that people say. Just because they have qualifications doesn't necessarily mean that they know what they're talking about, or even if they do know that what they're talking about, that they're right, you know, because a lot of this is not factual, it's just opinion.
Okay. And last question for you. What would you like to say to all the trans and questioning people out there who haven't yet found their voice?
I would say it's absolutely okay. That they shouldn't feel pressured to be visible. They shouldn't feel pressured to speak out. It's a huge step to take. It's something that they'll need to think about. And the first time they do it, the first time, there's the whole coming out process where you talk to your family and your friends and your colleagues at work and that sort of stuff. And that's hugely daunting. But then there's the being prepared to address the world as a whole, as a trans person, and say, this is who I am, this is how I want you to accept me. And to be prepared to talk about it. And I don't really like the idea. I mean, somebody called me a role model in a work thing recently, and I was moved beyond belief because nobody ever called me a role model before. And I don't think that we should have to be role models, but if somebody looks at what I do, you know, that you can reach the top of your game, in my case as a lawyer, and just happen to be trans, then that's, for me, that's the most important thing. Because 20, 30 years ago, if you were trans, that meant, you know, you could only reach the top of your game if you were in a certain sort of career. So I think the thing is, it's a huge step. Take your time, think about it, don't feel pressured, but don't also feel that the world is a terrifyingly scary place, because the world is not Twitter, right? The hatred and the poison that you see disseminated via Twitter and other forms of social media on a daily person that centers around transgender issues is not my experience of the real world. And I know that I have, white privilege and all the rest of it. I'm sort of socioeconomically privileged and racially privileged, I guess you'd have to say. And so other people do have it tougher than me. But I have to say, in what is it now, getting on for 3 years of being out, I had one scruffy guy at a bus stop make a comment under his breath as I walked past. And that's the only real transphobic behavior I've ever had to deal with in public. So it's not like it used to be when people used to, when I was walking down the street in the early 90s and people used to point at me and laugh in my face. That just doesn't happen in my experience anymore. What I want to do is to say, it's a big step. Take your time, think about it, be comfortable, but don't be frightened, because it's not as scary a place as you think it is, because I thought it was for 20 years and hid away and really suffered as a result. So be brave, but be comfortable.
Okay, thank you, Maddie. Thank you for your time.
It's been a pleasure.